Here I am with my cat, who is stuck here in the basement of Susan's house because she can't live at my house right now because she has feline leukemia and feline AIDS, and she can't affect the other cats. So she's over here. And the dogs are wanting to come in here, but they can't come in here, even though they really want to come in here because there's a cat. But that's not what this video is about. What the hell is this video about? It's about, am I a socialist? It's funny, some of the videos I've made, I've gotten some interesting comments, and which I knew I was going to get every once in a while. Because when you start attacking the system, and I don't mean capitalism, I just mean the way things are in the world in general, people start coming out to defend it. And the people that start coming out to defend it, excuse me, I'm pouring some Diet Coke here, this is why I can't look you right in the eye. The people that come out to defend it aren't necessarily the super rich people that are benefiting from it. It's like the regular people that it's so entrenched in their minds. Hey, the cat, let's see, how's the cat? Where's the cat? Where's the cat? How you doing? Cat's doing pretty good. Thanks for asking. The people that are defending the system, the status quo, very often are the people that are being the most hurt by it. The regular working people, to use our working class, or to use that vernacular. And that's funny. There's a fellow who I cannot remember his name right now. Really, really brilliant guy. He made the YouTube channel Cash College, and now he has his own channel. But he talks about this idea that, in fact, there is, instead of the pyramid we normally see of like the elites and then the middle class and the working class, really, there's kind of like the elite class and then there's the working class. And that includes doctors and lawyers and all the people that have to go to work every single day because if they don't, they're not going to make enough money to live because, of course, they have a bigger mortgage and all that kind of stuff. And there's a a certain income bracket where you're making all your money off of investments and off of derivatives and all this kind of stuff. And it's a different bracket. And there's not very many people in there, but we all kind of work for them. And it's interesting because when I was a kid, I was much more into the idea of trickle-down economics. I went through my conservative phase, and there's nothing wrong with going through a bunch of different phases. It's not like I'm in a liberal phase now, but I got fairly conservative at that point, and I really kind of bought into that that story. And it made some sense, looking at this idea that people are, that if you don't tax people with a lot of wealth, then they're going to invest all this money into businesses, which means we're all going to have jobs and make more money, and that'll be great, except it didn't actually work like that. And, I had no idea at the time that, several changes had happened. From the late 70s, because I was a kid. I was born in 68, so I didn't realize they had started changing the taxation code. And when you hear about the idea that it was 90%, you didn't realize that was 90% after a certain amount. And it seemed like, they got rid of this egregious tax on really rich people. But what happened was they started taxing them much, much less. A lot of the taxes end up being spent by bring back the 90%. A lot of the taxes are being paid by us. And if you look at the percentage of just say income that really rich people are paying, it's something like, 20% or 6%, depending on who they are. Yeah, it's not a lot. And, the regular individual, the working class people like you and I, unless you're super rich, we're paying a much larger percentage of our income in taxes, and it affects how we can live our life to a much larger degree. If you're making a ridiculous, obscene amount of money and you're paying a lot of taxes, that doesn't mean that you're not going to be able to buy a new car or to buy your kids shoes or to pay for your vet bill. That's not how it works. But when you're a normal person, you're paying that much tax, you're paying 30% or whatever it is I'm paying at the end of the day, between state and local and all that kind of stuff. It takes a huge chunk out. Then takes a hit out of what am I able to do with the money that I actually have. And so anyhow, I really got interested in this idea of taxing wealth rather than income. And if you look at something like Gary's economics, he goes into a lot of that. If you don't know who he is, he was a trader, and he's one of those people that made lots of money and then all of a sudden said, oh crap, the economy's going to hell. Because he's looking at, okay, well, regular people don't have money. Okay, so, and governments don't have any money. Who has the money? Well, it's the rich people. And he goes, oh crap, like we have all the money, we have all the resources, and everybody's borrowing money from us and defaulting, and everything's going to hell in a handbasket. And we ought to do something about this. And at first, this idea of taxing, wealth rather than income seemed a little bit squirrely or odd to me. But one of the things I realized, and I'd like to say I made these discoveries myself. I heard other people say it and then thought about it. And one of the things that's hard about that is, like, it's really easy to tax income because it's very visible. Your check is right there. The government can go right in and take the money right out of your check before you ever get it. But taxation of wealth, it's a little bit different. It takes a little bit more work. And I actually crunched the numbers, and trust me, this is just like crunching some numbers with some AIs, and how much would it actually take to replace the income that we're getting right now from, say, taxing income in the United States with a wealth tax, and taxing like progressively, actually, like I think it's after $1 million, and maybe it was after $10 million, but starting at like a 1% tax. And then I think the way I did it went up to 3%, and that's if you have like some ridiculous amount of money, like you're $100 million or something like that. It doesn't take a lot of taxation on wealth of the top brackets to pay for everything, whereas most people don't actually have to pay any tax at all because they just don't have enough wealth to do that. And in fact, even modeling that for some redistribution, where you actually give some people that are, like, say, to have negative net worths some money back, it's still, which, I mean, people like get up in arms, like, my God, what are you doing? Dude, we're talking about ultra wealthy people here. And we're talking about people that are just, dying. It didn't take a lot, but the narrative that the ultra rich will give you is they're coming after your money, and they're going to give it to these people that aren't working. And these people probably from a different country and probably have brown skin. Okay? And that's the freaking narrative they're giving you. And the amount of people that I know, like, say, here in Connecticut, where the state is, it's a liberal state, but it's fairly split. And I have many, many, many friends that are very, very conservative. I have a lot of friends that are business owners, small business owners. They work their asses off. They make a lot of money. And they are convinced that taxation reform is going after them. And that's not the case. Right now, they're the ones getting taxed the most. The taxation reform, if you do a major taxation reform, is trying to take the pressure off of them, taking the pressure off of you and I, and putting it on people that have obscene amounts of money that weren't able to accumulate those obscene amounts of money after things got reorganized around the Second World War. And there was this, a 25-year period or so, maybe 35-year period, like after the Second World War up until like the mid to late 70s, where, unions were really strong, the taxation was pretty progressive, and corporations had a lot of restrictions and regulations on them. And I've talked with a good friend of mine who is absolutely, anti-socialism and very pro-capitalism. And I'm not necessarily anti-capitalism, but we agreed on this idea that capitalism is probably one of the better systems out there, but it needs to be regulated. Just looking at, say, the collapse in 2008, and how much of that was based upon these derivatives, like these trading derivatives or swap derivatives, and things like AIG. We bailed out AIG to the tune of something like $180 billion. With these ridiculous, convoluted financial systems or financial swaps and things that and insurance on loans and all these things that these various companies and the banks did. And these are the kind of things they wouldn't have been able to do years ago because it was regulated. And a lot of those regulations were removed, and Reagan and Thatcher busted the unions. And without all these regulations, it's wonderful because all these rich people can make lots more money, and they'll tell you that a rising tide will raise all ships, and that's bullshit. Because I don't know if you've noticed, but the ships have gotten raised are theirs, not ours. And for years, I would have argued the other way. But I've reconsidered, and I've done more research, and more information has come to light, as they say. And I've realized that, in fact, I believe some things that were not true. And it's not like there's all evil people on one side of the argument and all the good people on the other side of the argument, because that is way too what's the word I'm looking for? Naive. That's way too naive. But it's clear that the way that the system is running right now is designed to protect the people that are super rich, to protect the corporations, to protect the employers, and to make sure, and I don't mean little employers and small businesses, I mean big, giant employers, and to make sure they don't carry risk. If you look at like 2008, when AIG got bailed out, then that they bailed them out. AIG kind of failed afterwards, but what they were bailing them out was all the money that they owed all these other banks, because they were essentially insuring the bad mortgages that these banks were writing. And so the banks got all this money back, and then they carry on business as usual. Okay? Now, what happens if you and I screw up like that? We don't get bailed out. We don't get bailed out. These guys they're too big to fail. Bullshit. I don't care what happens to the economy at that point. If you play fast and loose like that and you screw up, well, guess what, buddy? You're done. Why should the rules be different? Well, the rules are different because they're rich, because they have pull, because their pals in the government, well, those are rich people too, for the most part. There are very few people in government that aren't privileged, that aren't already rich, that weren't rich before they got there, that aren't making money now because of where they are. Corruption is, everywhere. It's worse in other places. Trust me. I have friends in Puerto Rico, and they tell me about the corruption there. It's mind-blowing. We have it fairly good here in the United States, but it's still pretty freaking bad. And what's remarkable is the people that will argue the most with you, when you start talking about things like this, are the people that are on the same playing field as us, that have just been sold this line of BS that, if we're going to change anything, if we're going to tax a little more progressively, if we're going to maybe invest more money in infrastructure, what this is doing is they're going to be taxed more, and their money is going to be given to people that don't work. And they'll just, they'll be told, okay, well, you know what the real problem is? It's these immigrants. It's these other people here, and pointing right at them. This is the problem. You see, you remember when that happened in Nazi Germany? Okay? That was the Jews were a really easy scapegoat at that point. And Hitler says, you know what? All the problems here are being caused by them. It was this whole other thing after World War I, where Germany was punished by the other nations. And I don't want to go into the whole details, but the history of the atomic bomb, Richard Rhodes, great book. He goes into a lot of detail about this. That's not why I read the book. I read the book because I was fascinated by nuclear physics and that kind of thing. And even though the bombs are horrible, it's really fascinating how they work. But it was really interesting because in Europe, and especially in Germany at that point, the Jewish community was very insular, and they did fairly well because they hung out together, and they used some pretty good business practices. And so they were an easy target. See how good they're doing? The whole problem, your problem is those people. Let's go kill them and get rid of them. And I don't know if anything like that's happening in America right now, but it sure seems like that. And while people are just looking in that direction, oh, this is the problem, the rich people are taking your money. Or, having it all flow up to the top. And, it's funny because I was for a very long time very libertarian. And I don't mean a Republican that wants to smoke pot. I mean, if you really look up libertarianism, it's fairly interesting. I'm not completely divorced from some of those mindsets. I would call myself more compassionate. However, there are things like infrastructure that taxes pay for, things like roads, things like healthcare, things like childcare, all these kind of things. Investment in human beings and investment in the infrastructure that makes things work. Who benefits the most from that infrastructure? Is it you and I? You could argue to say, oh, it's the people that actually they can't afford these things, so they get this stuff, or they have the roads so they can get to work. Who benefits the most from roads? Is it you and I so we can get to work, or is it Jeff Bezos? Who benefits from roads the most? It's Jeff Bezos. How else is he going to get his stuff to us? But he pays very little taxes and makes sure things are sheltered. And who gets to pay for the roads? We do. That's insane. That's the kind of stuff we're talking about here. And so that kind of stuff, it bugs me. That's not the hill I want to die on, so to speak, but it is something I've become more and more aware of, because I got to this point in my life where I was just like, you know what? I shouldn't be where I am. I have made some big, big mistakes in my life. And I talk about addiction and all that kind of stuff. I have definitely done some dumb things. I have bought some dumb things. And gotten myself into trouble financially. However, I look at all of my peers in Gen X, and I'm 57, and I see where we're ending up. And some people are doing well for themselves, are doing great, but a lot of people are, at this point where they're kissing retirement age, and they're not going to be able to. And they've worked really hard. And all of a sudden, they see all these things have happened. Like, instead of pensions, they have 401ks. They have things that have been reneged on, or they had other expenses happen where the price of everything keeps going up, while wages kind of stagnate in terms of keeping up with inflation and what have you. So, they're seeing this idea like they're not going to be able to retire, or it's not going to be what they thought it was going to be, and they're looking at people that are maybe 10 years older than them, and they have a much different life, much different outcome. What happened? And, for a lot of us, we're wondering, what did I do wrong? It's not like you did anything wrong. The deal changed. And the deal changed, the changes they started making in the late 70s and in the 80s, they didn't make a hell of a lot of difference then. I mean, they did, but it snowballed. And it's compounded over the decades. And so now, all of a sudden, deal isn't great for us as Gen Xers, but we have a really good deal compared to the generations beyond us. I have some, I guess my kids are millennials. They're 32 and 30. And I know some people who are younger, which I guess are Gen Z or whatever these people are. They are screwed. They are screwed. I am lucky that I have a house. And, I literally got it because my girlfriend, who passed away from lung cancer, bought a house, and she ended up leaving it to me, or I assumed the mortgage, and, or had to get I'm very lucky that I was able to do that based on some other things that happened in my life earlier. Hooray. But my mortgage is a pittance compared to rent. Right now, in my area, I live in Connecticut, but not the most expensive part of Connecticut, a one-bedroom apartment is $1,500, and that's in a place that could charitably be called a slum. And if you want to get a two-bedroom apartment or something like that, I have friends that have kids and are single parents that have kids, and it's insane. These people are never going to be able to afford a house, ever. And, I did get one comment from one person that and it wasn't completely BS, but they talked about this idea that, hey, people need to, curtail their spending. And, the way you can save up all this money is for the cat that gets sick and all that kind of stuff is you stop going to Starbucks every single day, and, all that sort of thing. And you cancel some of your subscriptions, and then you're going to save money. I get it. However, that's not the reality of most of the people that I know, especially a lot of the younger people I know. Their reality is that they're not spending all that kind of money on stuff like that. They're frugal. They're working their asses off. Sometimes they have two jobs. And, they're in these apartments which are costing them, an incredible amount of money. I forget what the median income in America is supposed to be right now. Maybe it's supposed to be 75 grand. And I suppose with music income and with having a company car, I probably make close to that. If you count the company car being worth like 15 or 20 grand, whatever it is. I'm not making not making nowhere near as much money as I used to make, at the job I have, and and playing music. And anyhow, point is, I might be making that, but I know a lot of other people that are making less money than that. Maybe they're making like 50 grand or under. And okay, well, great. If you have this single bedroom apartment, well, that's 30 grand a year, right? Isn't that 30 grand? No, is it 50? Maybe it's not. 1,500. Okay, 1,000, 15,000. Okay, it's a lot of money. It's a lot of money, kids. Okay, so it's not 30 grand a year. Whatever the hell it is. It's a lot of money. And then by the time you put in food and everything else, and medical expenses, and if they've got kids, anything like that, you're done. You're not buying extra stuff. I don't buy very much. I'll tell you what my vices are. I mean, I have, yeah, no car payment is freaking phenomenal. I'm screwed if I, if that's the thing. If I get a different job, I have to get a job that probably pays $15,000 to $20,000 more a year in order to be able to offset the idea of no longer having a company car. So I mean, my job really pays crap if you look at the hourly rate. It's bad, but the company car is a huge, huge, huge perk. But I'll tell you what I'm spending money on right now. That's probably my biggest my biggest vice. And it's at the point where I really have to consider maybe like not drinking it anymore because it's too much. I don't, I haven't used alcohol or other drugs for over 13 years. Haven't used cigarettes for over 12. I go out to eat every once in a while. I'm not going to Starbucks every single day. And so let's see, I've got a lot of instruments, but I bought them a while ago. So I probably have legitimate like 60 grand worth of musical equipment, that I've accumulated over the years and what have you. But this is also like part of how I make my living, is with all that. So they're tax write-offs to a certain extent. But I'm not spending tons and tons of money on crazy stuff. And the people that I know, they're not spending tons of money on crazy stuff either, and they are freaking dying. I have some good friends. I have some, good friends in recovery. So all these people have put their lives back together. There's some single mothers or what have you. And, yeah, man, the sugar tooth. Well, see, Diet Coke has no sugar. But these cookies right here, sugar, which is good. Anyhow, yeah, now I got off the track. But there's people in recovery that have, they put their lives back together. And so I know some like younger mothers. When I say young, it's funny because they're in their mid to late 30s. But I guess that's young now when you're 57. But cookies are the best. But they're putting their lives back together. So I know one in particular. She's got a cleaning business. She works like tons of hours. She's got a couple kids, and if something goes wrong with her car, it's a disaster. And she's making decent money, but she has to have a 2-bedroom apartment, which costs like ridiculous amounts of money. My house right now, that it's worth $300,000. I don't owe anywhere near that much money on it. The value of this house went up so much. Why are the values of houses going up so much? Because rich people and private equity firms want them, because they want them as investment properties. They want to be able to rent them out to other people for a lot of money. And when rich people want assets, like real resources, like houses, the price goes up because there's competition for those things. Okay? And they drive the price up. And guess who cannot afford them any longer? Normal people. So that's why housing prices are up. All the other reasons they're going to tell you are complete BS. That's why housing prices are so high. So if you can't afford a house, and the rent is insane. So my house has gone up to $300,000. They built 2 houses right down the street from me. They took a single lot, turned it into 2 different houses. They somehow got it zoned that way. And of course, I go on Zillow to see, I think I was looking at the value of my house. And I said, well, let me go see what these houses are for. Or maybe I saw like an apartment thing. Yeah. Maybe the we'll see what apartments are. I forget, but I found the houses on my street. It turns out they are not selling them. They didn't sell them to people to live in. They're renting them, but they're not renting them as a house for a family. They're renting rooms in the house. So these houses are 3 bedrooms each, and they are renting the rooms in these houses for something like $15 or $16, maybe it's like $1,800. So you get the room and the use of the house with 2 other people that you don't know. I mean, insane amounts of money. So I'm renting out the rooms in my house. And the amount of money, Airbnb, it's not, it's just a house they can live in, It's insane. I forget exactly how much, but whatever it is, it's flabbergasting. So I look at my house. What could I charge for my house if I wanted to rent it out to a family? And I couldn't do it. I could not live with myself charging what the house is actually worth. My youngest daughter lives there. I charge her a pittance. because my oldest daughter, I am not worried about the world, or her, I'm worried about the world, whoever's in front of her. She's got 3 little kids already, and they're very responsible, doing great. She's a dietitian at a children's cancer center at Yale, and her husband's a teacher. Then, so I have 3 wonderful granddaughters, which are awesome. They're 4 and 2.5 and 1, and you probably don't care, but they're great. Let me show you pictures of my grandchildren. But my youngest, I kind of worry, like, is she going to be okay? So I didn't sell the house. Figure, okay, well, I'll rent it to her. I'm renting to one of her friends is there now, and I've got somebody else who's looking at it, and I cannot charge them, what I could probably get. I think I might, I think I'm charging them like something like the other people, $800, all utilities included. And I could charge so much more. And I feel guilty charging what I'm charging. And they're getting a great deal, and it seems awful to me. Because I remember not so long ago, when I could get an apartment for like $700, and it had, several rooms, and it has just gone bananas. However, you'll get people that are already set, and or kind of set. People about my age, maybe a little bit younger, and they'll say, "Well, the problem is these people are buying too many lattes." Dude, I got news for you. I've got news for you. There's more going on. Yeah, I have a soul. I like to hope so. There's more going on than that. And yes, I understand. Trust me, I have been a person that has overspent. I've been a person that's made bad financial decisions. I definitely look back on my youth and other times and say, you know what? I should have invested money. I shouldn't have spent money on this, that, the other thing. Maybe I should have bought less guitars. I don't know. They're pretty cool, though. All that stuff. But still, beyond all that, things have gotten really, really bad. It wasn't so long ago, I knew some of these people, that you could literally raise a family on one income. That's what my grandparents did. That's what a lot of the older people, people that were younger than I am right now, but when I was a kid, my grandparents would have the old people over. But that's what they did. And they were able to maintain, a life. It wasn't an extravagant life, but you could have a bunch of kids. You could go on a vacation every once in a while, and you could have one freaking income take care of that. You look at the price of the house, and it wasn't that, many more times than your annual income. I just look at my mom's house, what her mortgage was. The taxes on her house became more than the mortgage at one point. It was bananas. And that was a possibility. It's not a possibility anymore. It was rough when I was younger. Like I started to look at, man, this is going to be pretty tough to actually afford a house. It's really bad now. And so there's also this concept of luxury poverty. And the idea is that when you're in poverty, you're not, but you're buying all these things. You've got this iPhone, the latest iPhone. I got the latest iPhone, by the way, because my other one was crapping the bed. And so I got, pretty cool iPhone. Hooray. But I have a YouTube channel. It's a tax write-off to a certain extent. But, they're doing that. They're buying the lattes. They're buying the expensive stuff. And exactly. Remember, you got it right. No, the relative cost of things like luxuries compared to like your house or your income, used to be extravagant. The amount of money that a VCR used to cost, when they were relatively new, it was a lot of money compared to the price of your house, compared to the amount of money you were taking home. It was a big deal to get a VCR. It was a big deal for somebody to get like a cell phone. Can you remember how expensive those things were? It was a big deal to do a lot of these things. And the price of homes, the price of food, the price of basic necessities, while it was, a lot, it wasn't as much compared to your income. And things have flipped. And all of a sudden, the price of those luxury items has come down in terms of like what percentage of your income is this. And it's gone way down in terms of what percentage of your house, the cost of your house, is this luxury item going to be. When you can, say, spend $2,000 on the coolest iPhone in the world, but, your house is $450,000, that's nuts. I mean, my girlfriend Susan got the new assessment on the house. And this is the assessment for taxes, which is usually less than the actual sale value of this house. And it's insane. The value of her house went up by $100,000 last year, so she's got to pay extra taxes on that. Crazy. And it's an experiment I'd like to do. I have to take a look at this and see what the average person is paying, not only in income tax, not only in local and state taxes, but in what you could arguably call maybe sort of a wealth tax, and that would be things like property taxes. And of course, you don't necessarily own your home outright, unless you do, in which case, good on you. But the bricks are made of iPhones. But the where was I going with that? But you could at least look at like the property taxes and say, well, it's kind of sort of a wealth tax, and look at what the average person is actually paying, and then look at what like wealthy people are paying. What percentage of their income are they paying taxes on? And what kind of property taxes are they paying? Because when you're talking about you can talk about income disparity, but the real issue is wealth disparity, and wealth disparity has just become astronomical. People sell their homes. They don't leave them to their children anymore because even I was tempted. Here I am, like I've decided, okay, I'm going to move in with Susan. Well, I could sell my house right now for like over $300,000. That's a lot. Like but I can't do that because of my kid. But it's tempting. But if I sell that, then guess what happens? That asset leaves the family. There's no way my daughter's ever going to be able to purchase a house because it's that much money or more. So if I sell my house, where does that asset go? It probably goes to a private equity firm. You know how I know that? Because I get emails and calls all the time wanting to buy my house. It's not from people that want to move in. I can tell you that. It's from people and organizations that want it as an investment. And once those assets go to those firms, they don't go back. Wealthy people, wealthy firms buy assets, and then they use those assets to raise more money to buy more assets. And those are the real resources that, money is, money are like little check marks, little pieces of paper. But the actual resources, the ownership of that's like real actual wealth. And if you look at what the average person owns versus the rich, the super wealthy, it's not even close. And you can look at the last, say, 40 years and see that transfer of real resources going, the cats are doing well. Yep, she's doing well. You're pissed off, aren't you? Thanks, Bromo. And that transfer of real resources has been going on. And then all of a sudden, like, we're wondering, well, we can't afford the assets anymore. And if we want to use any of the assets, well, they're going to rent them to us at this exorbitant price. And, it becomes this serfdom. And we're already kind of in this serfdom economy now. And once again, that's one of those things. It's not the hill that I want to die on. It's just something I became aware of. Because if anything, my focus lately has been on waking up. A little bit like the Matrix. Wake up. See what's really going on. Wake up, look at your own life, my own life. See what's going on there. I realized, okay, well, I'm not really happy with how this is going on. Coming to the realization it's not all my fault. There are things I could do differently. But starting to realize that, for a lot of us, where we are in life financially isn't all our fault. That we've been duped to a certain extent. And some have been duped to the point where they will defend this system and say, well, you're a socialist otherwise. And dude, I'm not advocating socialism, as such. And we can go down that rabbit hole. But I'll tell you what, I have friends that live in Sweden and Finland and Norway and Iceland, other countries, and they're like, dude, what are you doing? What is wrong with your country? I had friends from Sweden come over here, and they could not believe that when people get sick, we let them die if they can't pay for it. They were flabbergasted. They were flabbergasted about dental care here. Like if you're on state dental, oh, thanks. Yeah, meritocracy is, it's a myth. And I believed it for years, but they couldn't believe the dental situation in the United States. Whereas, like, if you got like a infected tooth or an abscess, and if you were on state insurance, what would happen is they'd pull it, and they're like, they pull it, they pull it out. Do they give you a new one? No, they don't give you a new one, and they couldn't believe it. And Finland, it's the happiest country in the world. I'm not going to like go down the whole rabbit hole of all that kind of thing. But for years, I absolutely was like, no, there's no way the government will screw everything up. And listen, government's people too. There's one of the first things you learn in political science is there is no answer. Not just there's no easy answer. There's no freaking answer, because the questions are, okay, what are the rules? Says who? Who put them in charge? And then it gets bad after that. But there are systems that work better or worse than others. But in any kind of system, what tends to happen if you're not careful is people will take advantage of it, figure out any kind of loopholes, and try to get themselves in power. And once that people get themselves in power, that tends to snowball, and power begets more power, and money and assets beget more money and assets. So anyhow, got to wake the hell up. And that's what I did. I woke up and realized, okay, it's not all my fault. What the hell do I do about this now? And, part of it was like, I looked at my job. It's like, I freaking hate my job. I've had a bunch of jobs in my life. And it's not because I suck. I had a career with the state for a very long time, working with people with disabilities. And I can't do that anymore unless I pay a lawyer a lot of money. Dark half of the year is right. Finland being dark half of the year. I'm not saying we move there, but I can't do that unless I pay a lawyer a lot of money. That was my career for a long time. I lost it as an indirect result of active addiction, but I also got kind of railroaded, and don't want to go into that story. But like it was, I was taken advantage of to a certain extent, but I was not innocent either. But since then I've had other jobs, but I realized that the jobs where I had the most satisfaction was where I was making a real actual impact on people, and I wasn't necessarily being told what to do as a pawn to make a thing for somebody else to make them rich, because that's what most jobs are. You do this thing, you stay in your lane, and what you're doing is making somebody else rich. You're doing the company mission, all that kind of stuff, and you swallow all the Kool-Aid, and we're growing the profits and blah blah blah. And I'm saying it's wrong, but you're making somebody else rich, and if your labor wasn't worth a hell of a lot more than what you're getting paid, they wouldn't hire you for that. So I realized I didn't dig that. I didn't like working. Not only just because it left a bad taste in my mouth, but because I didn't care about the stuff they want me to do. The job I'm in particularly right now, don't really like. And people ask me all the time, Ivan, what kind of job would you really want to have? Always froze up. Now, part of that could be because I'm a little neurodivergent, but I realized one day I can't answer that because I don't want a job. And I don't mean I want to sit on the couch all day and do nothing. I don't want to work for somebody else. I don't want to do that stupid shit. I want to do something that interests me, that makes an impact, that I have some kind of control over. Okay, what do I do? And, I wish I was one of those people on YouTube that then told you, well, this is what you do, and I'm going to sell you this course, for $2,000. It'd be great. I can make lots of money, except I don't freaking know. And I'm not... I couldn't live with myself if I did that. If I could actually help you, and I'm not saying one day I will coach or something, who knows. But it would have to be something I could really help you with, because otherwise I'm just being disingenuous. And so I was like, okay, well, I can't do that. So it's a matter of figuring out, like, what the hell do I do? Is it going to be just YouTube? That'd be great. I love sitting there and pontificating about crap, and I enjoy it. I've done this for a long time, talking about role-playing games and other stuff. But I realized I just did not want to work for somebody else. So what I'm saying is, hey, right on. Hey, motion picture, how you doing? It's okay, man. I got to shove some. If I shove cookies in my mouth, then I can't really talk. So I can't do. I can just look at them. So when I talk to other people about it, when I talk to you nice people every once in a while, like I'll just say, well, if that's something that like all of a sudden irks you, or you say, hey, I don't like this either, you've got to figure something out. what that thing is, I can't tell you. It could just simply be a job that you actually really like. That's doing it for you. And I tried to get some jobs in the recovery community. I might try again, although that can be a little bit. It can be it can be tough if you're in recovery and you're working in the recovery community as well. It can be kind of tough, and people kind of burn out on that. They burn out in general, but something where I was actually helping people and working with people in some way. I don't really want to be a psychologist. I'm not really into the idea of going back to school for a long, long time at my age to, get some kind of degree, which may or may not help out. And the price of school has become insane. The idea that schools are for profit. And I used to think that was really, back in my much more conservative libertarian days, it's insane that schools are for profit. Once again, this is an infrastructure thing. There's, I think just, yes. I'll hold that thought. There was a time when, I was much more into this idea that like everything should be privatized. But now the school, like things like school and college, that's part of the infrastructure. There are other countries where like you go to school, they'll pay for it. It seems like ridiculous, right? It's just like, hey, you too, Cherokee. It's just like the idea of like public school. Sometimes I have friends that are older and they're like, well, I don't have kids anymore. I shouldn't have to pay taxes for public school. It's the infrastructure, dude. And if you're Jeff Bezos, you want people to go to school. You want people to be intelligent. Because if you're a ultra wealthy business person and you're running all these businesses, you want people to be smart enough to know how to do the crap to make you the big money. That's why, if you're an ultra wealthy person, you ought to pay for the frickin' infrastructure and for things like people to go to school. Because otherwise, you've got these predatory college loans. You've got these people that are coming out of school with loans which far exceed their ability to pay them back based upon the income they can make in the jobs that they trained for. And that is insane. And those loans won't be forgiven, but will bail out AIG in 2008 to bail out all the banks and then allow them to stay in business because they're too big to fail, because they're your cronies, because they're other really, really rich people that can buy the election. Okay? Does that piss you off? It should. Do we think that the ultra wealthy will be seen as a problem rather than an aspiration? Well, that's part of the thing. Is the United States and other countries, but the United States, because I'll pick on that one because I live here. And I'm most familiar with it. There's been a big. The American dream has been sold to us. If you work as hard as you can and do the right things, then you can be anything. And the truth is, this is possible. I'm not going to say you can't be, but there is such a thing as persistence, where the idea that people don't tend to move that far away from their parents in terms of socioeconomic status. And you can actually see there's different nations have different figures. Ours is bad. Ours, we tend to stay there. There's also a certain amount of luck. For every Jeff Bezos, for every Elon Musk, they're the people that did what they did and they just didn't get the lucky break. And there's a survivorship bias, on the people that do succeed. You don't have to be Jeff Bezos, wealthy. But there's a survivorship bias on the people that succeed where they attribute their success entirely to themselves, to their hard work, to their, generally it's like, I did more than anybody else did and what anybody else was willing to do. Therefore, I deserve this. And people are, Griftly. People are, they want that hope. Well, maybe I could get there too. And I know some very, very wealthy people who have worked really, really hard, got to the point where they can invest in things and make a good amount of money. And, there's always people have that hope. I'd love to do that too. I mean, heck, I buy Powerball tickets because, hey, that would be great. I'm not going to lie. But that hope is something that, gets fueled too much. And I'm not saying it's impossible, but we get given this idea that it's a meritocracy, that like if as much as you work, you're going to get the exact thing that you deserve. If you put if you put this effort in, you're going to get this result. That is not true. There are things like luck involved, and there's a lot of people put that effort in and don't get anything. There are people that just right place, right time, boom, they get it. Are you going to make it much more likely if you put the work in? Absolutely. That's a given. In some cases, you make it possible. You're not going to succeed in business if you don't get in business. So people tend to put the super rich up on a pedestal because they want to be able to get there too. It's not like they like those people; they just want the ability to get there too. But the thing is, the way the system is, and I say system to mean like laws and and the way we're kind of psychologically programmed. The way the system is right now, it tends to benefit those at the top and the people in the bottom. The best thing they can have is for us to be, hustling, hoping to make it. Because if we're hustling, hoping to make it, and working really hard, guess who gets the most benefit from that hard work? They do. There's a great novel called Serpent's Reach by it's a sci-fi novel, and there are the I don't want to go too esoteric, but the main people, the Contran, the people that found the whole area, but they developed two different kinds of other people. They did genetic engineering, and one is this class of people that die at 40, and they're kind of like slaves. But there's these other people called betas, and betas are us. They're people that work really hard and hustle, and it was almost like the 80s. I think the book might have been written in the 80s. People work hard and hustle, and they want money and status and all these kind of things. And they created these people because they knew they were going to work hard enough to make their lives of luxury possible, because they're going to provide all this income for them. And so, that selling that American dream, selling that idea, tends to help the people at the top. It doesn't mean it's not possible. So that's probably a very circuitous way of saying that, maybe we'll start to look at them as the problem. It's not that they're the problem. The ultra-rich person is not the problem. The system that gets them there, that's a problem. And there's narcissism. There's I think Ali Abdaal, who I do not really watch. I went through a phase of watching some people on YouTube that were money people. I'm like, okay, you guys are annoying me now. But Ali Abdaal said something very interesting one time. He said, in order to get rich, you have to have an unhealthy obsession with it. And to a certain extent, I believe that's probably true. To get anything, if you want to be a really famous musician or a really accomplished musician, you need to have almost an unhealthy obsession with that. Not just with the practicing part, but with the, if you're talking about like making it as a rock person, the people that I knew that like really, got the closest to making it, they were, they constantly promoting and all this other stuff. Even the people right now that I play with, that get lots and lots of gigs, and some of them are absolutely god awful. But they promote the hell out of themselves. They have this unhealthy obsession with like being a rock star. So I just go ahead as a sub person or go on their gigs and play bass and get paid. But they have this unhealthy obsession, so they get us all the gigs. So hey, what am I going to do at that? I'm just going to ride the gravy train at that point. But that can be a problem. And what I mean is that mindset can be a problem on my part, and maybe on your part too, because for a long time I didn't want to be the guy in charge. I believe, I don't have the head for business or the heart for business. I'm not that cutthroat. I'd rather be somebody that just kind of goes along for the ride, and maybe I'm like, the logistics guy or whatever. Problem is, you're always doing what this other person wants. Let's say, I'll use this band leader as an example. I've played with one band leader, and he makes stupid decisions musically. He's not very good musically. I have to do a lot of things and eat a lot of crow in order to play with him, in order to get the gig and make the money, because it's his band, it's his gig. And if you're working for somebody else, even if you're like somebody that's like really, high up in the organization, it's a small organization, you just have to accept this thing that they're going to make the decisions. And maybe it's because I'm too egotistical, maybe it's because I'm too stubborn, maybe it's because I see, what other people don't see sometimes. I can't do that. Because every once in a while, like my mouth starts moving when it shouldn't, and I start to say, dude, this is effing stupid. which can get you in a lot of trouble. I don't know if you ever noticed that. But once again, what's the ultimate result for me, other than all of you giving me lots of money during this chat? I'm just messing with you. I don't know. I don't know if the YouTube is actually going to be the thing that ends up making me, or giving me enough of an income to quit my job. Although I wonder who's here. Maybe my people are here, in which case I have to stop the broadcast. But maybe YouTube will be the thing that helps me, quit my job entirely. Maybe it'll just be one of many things. But if you're in that same position, once again, I don't want to die on this hill either, and this video is not about that too. It's about waking up. But if you're in that position, you have to figure out, what am I going to do? Because we can be upset about the way the system is, and we can certainly advocate for change, and I think we ought to. I think we ought to advocate for things like taxing wealth rather than work. We think we ought to advocate for a lot more regulation when it comes to things like banking and business, because what happens is they do stupid shit, and then we all end up paying the price. Because that bailout for AIG and those banks, guess where that came from? That came from us. That came from taxpayer money. But not only that, but if you find I'm just not digging this situation in my life, you've got to do something different and figure out a way to not be as dependent upon these other people, like your boss or whatever. And some of that boils down to, yes, maybe spending less money, but some of it boils down to, okay, well, how else can I make a living? Is it just a job I like better? Or do I need to have some kind of business or businesses or side hustles? There's all kind of side hustles you can get now where I'm not dependent on these other people. And, I'm still wrestling with the fear aspect, or because it's not guaranteed. It's not like going to a job and then you get the check. Although jobs aren't guaranteed either. We just had a reorganization in the company I work for. Probably talked about this 8 times. But they just let go of a lot of people. People that had 35 years in the company. Yeah, sorry, we don't need you anymore. Goodbye. See you later. Jobs aren't secure either. But there's this illusion of security. And when you do anything, when I do my gigs, it's not guaranteed. I don't know exactly how much money I'm going to make. I don't know how much money I'm going to make with YouTube. I don't know how much money I'm going to make, any of the other things I've done for cash outside of a job. What will it take to get politicians to stop enjoying the money of system controllers? A freaking miracle. Regulation against that as well. And, a lot of regulation, which, guess who has the money? Yeah, guess who has the money? Guess who has the pull? We don't have the pull to buy elections, and elections are being bought. And being bought on both sides of the aisle. And then there's the whole argument of other parties aren't let in, all that kind of stuff. But, yeah, now I'm talking about things that it's not things we can't change, but the serenity prayer from recovery is very useful in a lot of situations. Grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change. I can't change the way the system is right now. I can do some things that and advocate for and work with other people to try to produce change. It's not guaranteed, and it's a long, long haul. And the courage to change the things I can, which is okay. What am I going to do about my situation? Am I just going to sit there and say this sucks, and this isn't fair, and it's not, or am I going to do something about it? And in doing something about it, it's hard. And that's one thing that, a lot of my shorts have been about that lately. It's just man, life is hard. Be gentle with yourself. Give yourself some credit as a human being. And, this whole thing called life is difficult. We don't get an instruction manual, and it's become increasingly more difficult in this country and other countries as things get screwier and screwier, if I can say that word, crazier. And it's just as life goes on too, with kids and with different phases of life, we start questioning, is this all there is? And all the usual, midlife crisis stuff, or just questioning things, is this what I really want to spend my time doing? And yeah, being kind to others is really important. And being kind to yourself. Realizing, because that's a lot of what happened too, that I've talked about, is we put down all these passions we have, the things that make life really worth living. And get to that point, I was like, I think I want to pick these back up. And those are some of the things that you can change. It's one of the reasons that I started playing more music after not playing it for a long time. It's one of the reasons I started playing more role-playing games after, stop, paying, that, oh, the daycares, holy crap. We thought about opening a daycare. My God, but then I couldn't charge people that much. Oh my God. Oh my God. Having the courage to make some kind of change in your life, realizing what it is, but having some compassion because it's going to be hard. It's going to be difficult. And I can tell you from experience, it is emotionally exhausting. But you know what the thing is? Life was emotionally exhausting anyway when I didn't have any control. So I've decided if I'm going to be emotionally exhausted, I might as well, do it while I'm struggling to try to make a difference in my own life. And having that wisdom to know the difference. What can I control, not control? And I can't even guarantee the outcome here, right now. Trying to get free of the system and the job and all that kind of stuff. I can simply do the things that make it more likely. And for me, I finally decided that, you know what, like, dying on that hill, even if I shouldn't succeed, and it's better than living under the thumb of other people, just kind of bemoaning my oppression and not doing anything about it. And I say that with full understanding that it is scary as hell to try to do something different. It is incredibly uncomfortable, just like a lot of life is incredibly uncomfortable. But it is incredibly uncomfortable. But, I feel better trying than not trying. You know what I mean, Torty? Well, I think my people are home. They just came back from New York watching Beetlejuice in the front row. So I want to hear the stories about that. But thanks a lot for watching, kids, and I will talk to you later. Yes, I want to stop streaming. See ya.